Project Sunflower. Written by Hoopy McGee. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Princess Celestia. Princess Luna. Original character. Main 6. Adventure. Human. Description. It is the year 2038, and the Earth is slowly being consumed by a spaceborne monstrosity dubbed the Black Tide, which is using nanotechnology to remake the planet into something hideously alien. Aaron Olson works for Project Harmonix, humanity's last-ditch effort to find a new world before the tide can wipe them out. But when that world is found, and it turns out to be occupied, Aaron will need to find the courage to face the unknown in order to save the inhabitants of both worlds. Many thanks to Easter for the fantastic cover image for this story. Now with its own TV tropes page. There is now a follow-up to this story, Sunflower, side project sequel, Project Sunflower, Harmony. Table of contents. Introduction, The Black Tide. Chapter 1, Beginnings. Chapter 2, Gathering Data. Chapter 3, Decisions. Chapter 4, To be a Pony. Chapter 5, First Steps. Chapter 6, Lunch with the Ponies. Chapter 7, Ponyville. Chapter 8, Job Hunting. Chapter 9, A Slightly Awkward Tea. Chapter 10, Party Time. Chapter 11, The Dangers of Cake. Chapter 12, Stress and Relaxation. Chapter 13, Arrival in Canterlot. Chapter 14, A Day in the City. Chapter 15, A Magical World. Chapter 16, The Iron Pony Competition. Chapter 17, Running Through the Darkness. Chapter 18, Fallout. Chapter 19, Discussions. Chapter 20, Things Get Complicated. Chapter 21, Humans in Equestria. Chapter 22, Settling In. Chapter 23, Lost and Found. Side story, Death is Not for Me. Chapter 24, Reunions. Chapter 25, Hope. Chapter 26, Travels. Chapter 27, Getting Reacquainted. Chapter 28, The Calm Before the Storm. Chapter 29, Malachite and the Tide. Chapter 30, Aftershocks. Chapter 31, Harmony. Author's Notes. Bonus chapter, Project, Parody. Introduction, The Black Tide. To Robert Thompson, Chairman of the Committee on Human Survival from Dr. Paul Velchik dated June 15, 2037. Bob, it's been almost 2 years since the impact. 2 years of tiny machines, semi-biological in nature, swarming in the uncounted trillions from the impact crater, tearing our world apart atom by atom and rebuilding it. Animal, vegetable, mineral, all terrestrial matter that those alien nanomachines encountered, being torn apart and rebuilt as something else. 2 years of an expanding circle of black matter radiating out from the impact site, creating what looks like a massive oil slick. An oil slick hundreds of miles in diameter and growing at an increasing pace every day. An oil slick that somehow moves and ripples as if it's alive. And that's why we call it the Black Tide. But I'm sure you know all that. It's your commission that's supposed to be salvaging what's left of humanity and ensuring our survival, after all. You've tasked the scientific community to come up with a plan to stop the tide. A noble goal, but one that we become less optimistic about with every passing day. Nothing we do seems to stop it for very long. We've tried everything. Flames, high voltage electric grids, various chemicals, radiation. Darn it, Bob, even dropping nukes on the blasted thing wasn't as effective as we hoped it would be. You've also asked the aerospace industry to come up with evacuation ships, in case we need to abandon our planet. You know my opinion on the feasibility of that. We could, at best, save a few 100,000 people. Those people would have the privilege of dying in space of starvation or radiation poisoning, rather than dying of starvation on Earth, or being consumed by the black tide. After the last several decades of decreasing space budgets, we simply don't have the know-how to build sustainable space stations. Certainly not self-sustainable space stations capable of supporting thousands upon thousands of people. No. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We need to leave this world, but not through space travel. I'm asking for Project Harmonix to be reopened. I'm asking not only for my budget to be reinstated, but to be increased. I've heard it said that it's nothing but a pipe dream, but my colleagues and I believe that we've had several very important breakthroughs. You know the timeline as well as I do. We have, at best, 5 years before the entire surface of our world is recreated as a gigantic puddle of black sludge. The situation is bleak. You say that we can't afford to waste resources on this. Well, I say that we can't afford not to. If we can get this to work, we can save everyone. Every last one of us. But we need to act now. The technology we need will take months to design and build. We can work on the theoreticals while we're getting the labs constructed, but the longer we delay, the more we'll die, and the tighter the timeline will be for evacuation. You've known me for over 20 years, Bob. You know that I wouldn't put my own pride ahead of the entirety of humanity. I honestly and truly believe this is our last, and best, hope. I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to do what's right. Signed, Dr. Paul Velchik. *****. To Dr. Paul Velchik from Robert Thompson dated July 29, 2037. I'm putting my neck out here for you, Paul. The men and women on the commission are a hard-headed bunch, and something like Harmonix is just too far-fetched for them to really understand. Frankly, I don't understand it either, but I trust you. It took a lot of arguing, it took a lot of pressure, but I finally got your budget approved. Your original budget, I'm afraid. You'll have to make do. I'll do what I can, though, to acquire whatever resources I can from other projects, provided that you understand that I may not always be able to get what you need. Best of luck, Paul. Best of luck to us all. *****. To Robert Thompson from Dr. Paul Velchik March 10, 2038. Well, Bob, you wanted news, and I've got one humdinger for you. We did it. The first successful test of Project Harmonix. Granted, the emitters blew up, but for a period of time, roughly 10 minutes, we saw into an alternate reality. Granted, it was a world that was completely hostile to all life as we know it. It looked like it was comprised mostly of lava fields and gigantic, steaming pits of acid. But that's only one out of an uncounted number of possible alternate worlds. That's why it's called harmonics, after all. We can tune these worlds in like radio stations. The tricky part will be to find one that we can live on and that isn't already occupied. Though, I imagine that unoccupied is a little flexible if we can't find any viable alternatives. I've attached an encrypted file to this note that shows you what we've seen. I'm sure, absolutely 100% sure, that with the right equipment, we can not only view these worlds but actually transport ourselves to them. All we need is resources. Resources that we've been fighting for months, now. Surely, with this new success, we can at least get some more resources thrown our way. We need to replace those emitters, and we can't skimp on the quality this time. Also, if we could build multiple labs, we could vastly improve our search speed. It took us almost a month to find Lava World, as my team is calling it. Considering that we may have to go through hundreds, or even thousands of variants before we find a viable world to escape to, we desperately need to speed things up. If it helps, we can build the scanning stations much more cheaply than the actual emitter stations. They just need to look for likely signals, which we can then key into the emitters to check them out for viability. Please tell me that we can do at least that much. *****. To Robert Thompson from Dr. Paul Velchik, April 19, 2038. Bob, as much as I appreciate the Commission's newfound faith in Project Harmonics, though, not as much as I appreciate the additional funding and personnel, I have to ask. Is it really necessary that we have a military observer? Not to mention all these new security measures. It seems a bit crazy to me. Who's going to attack us? Who's going to steal this technology? Honestly, all this hullabaloo, for lack of a better term, is just making life more difficult. It took me 3 minutes to get through the checkpoint this morning, and I'm the head of the project. Please, tell me this has nothing to do with those nutballs in Houston. We're over 1,000 miles away from that, and nobody knows we're here, anyway. The arcs weren't exactly secret, but we here at Harmonics aren't going around advertising our presence. *****. To Dr. Paul Velchik from Robert Thompson, April 21, 2038. Hi Paul. I'm sorry to say it, but yes, the new funding came with those strings attached. The Commission wants the military involved, and that's that. And, yes, the vote on that was unanimous. I don't think you really understand what's going on with those nutballs. They aren't just in Houston, Paul. They're all over the US, and the rest of the world. The Earth First movement is deadly serious about not abandoning our world. They blew up the ARC ships in Houston, because they see evacuation ships as a waste of resources that could be used fighting the tide, and also the coward's way out. They want to force the world governments into investing all resources into winning back the Earth, not leaving it. Suffice to say, if they ever did find out about Harmonics, they'd come after you. The security is there for a very good reason. You said when this all started that Harmonics was our best hope, our last hope. The Commission now believes that you're right. And with that comes the realization that you can't be allowed to fail, and you can't be allowed to be stopped by a bunch of short-sighted idiots who don't seem to realize that there's absolutely no long-term way to fight the tide. Also, Paul, I'm sending you a thesaurus. Seriously, hullabaloo. You have to stop talking like an old-time professor from the 20th century, man. Keep us posted on your progress. Chapter 1. Beginnings. Erin Olsen filtered into the auditorium with the rest of the interns at Project Harmonics. There were 47 of them in all, herself included, wandering into the room with a complete lack of haste. Many of the other interns were whispering excitedly back and forth to each other, wondering why they had been called together. Erin found herself unable to summon much enthusiasm. Project Harmonics was incredibly top secret, unbelievably well funded, and, as they were told regularly by management, it represented pretty much the last hope for the survival of humanity. Not only billions of lives, but all of the culture and history of the human race hung in the balance. The work itself, though, was about as exciting as watching paint dry. Most of Erin's day was spent carefully calibrating her own emitter array, staring at a screen and making minute adjustments until she found something that seemed to fit within the correct parameters. She then would take a snapshot of the data she found, sending the information to the actual scientists who worked in the emitter labs. Each snapshot she sent was a potential new world, which had really excited her at first. But, since she herself never got to see the results, the work eventually just got boring. After a few months, it went beyond boring and straight into mind-numbingly tedious. She'd been on the project for a little over 4 months now, and the most exciting thing she could remember happening was when the cafeteria had make your own Sunday day for lunch a week ago. She missed Sunday day. Erin picked out a seat somewhere towards the back and slumped into it with a sigh. When she'd left her desk, she'd snagged a notepad and pen for any notes she might need to take, since personal tablets were forbidden by security. She laid the notepad on her lap and tucked the pen behind her ear, adjusting her short brown hair in the process. The reason she picked a chair near the back was because she wanted to be one of the first ones out once the meeting was over. Not because she was in any hurry to return to her work, of course. Rather, it was because she might be able to steal a few minutes of personal time just to go for a short walk while everyone else was tied up in getting out of the room. Those brief moments of private time were all that Erin had to break up the tedium of the day. After a few moments, there was motion at the podium. A stout older man in a brown suit and red bow tie walked in, and by his massive spectacles, bushy salt and pepper beard, and bald head, Erin was able to identify him as Dr. Paul Velchik. He was the project head, a man she had seen only a handful of times in the half year she had been at the Harmonics compound. She perked up a little. Maybe this meeting would be interesting, after all. Dr. Velchik signaled to the audio technician that he was ready to begin and stepped towards the podium. The lights dimmed, and the interns stopped muttering to each other and instead focused on him. He cleared his throat, and then spoke into the microphone. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wanted to thank you for helping with Project Harmonics. I know the work is hard, and especially your end of the work is very tedious, but what we're doing here is, quite simply, the most important thing in the world today. You've all been working very hard. I can't thank you enough for that. But it's time, I think, to show you some of the fruits of your labors. Yes, he said, as excited whispering sprung up in the audience hall. That's right, we're going to show you just a few of the worlds that you've helped us to discover. He waited for a moment for the excitement his statement caused to die down a little. Erin felt her own heart racing with the excitement of the moment, and resenting the distracting muttering of the other interns around her. First up, there was a click, and what looked like a blurry video filled up the large screen to his left. This world was actually the first one we found. I apologize for the image quality, but the equipment we had back then was merely an early prototype. Images to follow will be much clearer. The technicians dubbed this one, Lava World, and I'm sure you can see why. Erin could, in fact, see why it was called that. The video was taken at an angle that seemed to be maybe 20 feet above the ground, facing the horizon. There were massive plains spreading out into the distance, black and rocky, and apparently shaking violently. These plains led up to gigantic mountains spewing ash and black smoke into the sky. A few of the mountains were actually in the process of erupting, flinging vast amounts of magma miles into the air. As you can see, Dr. Welchik continued, this particular location is unsuitable for human habitation. We were able to take several different viewings from this world, and we discovered that it not only is significantly larger than our Earth, implying a higher gravity, but it is volcanically active the whole world over. As interesting as Lava World would be to a volcanologist, we sadly had to cross it off the list of viable alternate worlds to migrate to. There was a brief chuckle from the interns at that, which died awkwardly when Dr. Welchik looked out into the audience in confusion. Apparently, he hadn't intended his statement to be taken as funny. You may be wondering how we received the image. Well, to put it simply, when we put the waveforms that you discover into our emitter array, we can, if the conditions are right, open up a window. If the conditions are near perfect, we can open an actual doorway into that world. Dr. Welchik began forwarding through the images, and Erin watched in fascination. Actual alien worlds. According to Dr. Welchik, not a single one of them was suitable for life, but still. Many of the worlds shown were simple chunks of rock, either airless or with a poisonous atmosphere. Some looked promising, only to discover some fatal flaw, such as one world with an intense gravity that would have made living on it extremely difficult. All of these worlds have been, in a very real sense, a triumph for humanity and science in general. Each of these worlds presents to us marvelous opportunities to study and learn fantastic things about our own universe. We've seen things that, honestly, baffle us. Worlds where the laws of physics as we know them simply do not seem to apply. Unfortunately, he continued, none of these present to us the opportunity we were looking for. A world which would, to put it bluntly, save humankind. He nodded again to the technician, and a new video image popped up on the screen. The professor continued once again. No world, that is, until this one, which we first discovered 3 weeks ago. Excited interns sat up straighter as the images on the screen progressed. The image displayed was of a world that looked very similar to Earth. The green grass and trees were immediately obvious. Deep blue skies with white cotton puff clouds spanned overhead. It was picturesque, though it seemed oddly brighter than Erin was used to seeing. Dr. Welchik let the interns gabble on excitedly for a few minutes, and then raised a hand for silence. Once they had settled down, he began speaking again. Now this world looks very like our own. Some species of plants are unknown to us, but we see many that look very similar to ones that we have here on Earth. We've seen animals that at least look like normal birds, squirrels and rabbits. Erin stared at the screen in rapt attention. The landscape was picturesque. She was barely registering what Dr. Welchik was saying as she stared in awe at the plains and hills, with hope burning in her chest. The view on screen suddenly jumped, and they were looking at mountain ranges, with densely wooded valleys and snow-capped peaks. Dr. Welchik kept on talking. We were able to send some probes over, and here the doctor had to pause as the already excited interns gasped and whispered to each other in amazement. The noise stopped abruptly as he cleared his throat in annoyance. A hum. Yes, as I was saying, we were able to send over some probes, and I'm pleased to say that, while the atmosphere is very slightly higher in oxygen and the gravity is very slightly less than here on Earth, the environment seems to be totally and completely compatible with human life. We've done it, ladies and gentlemen. We've found a world that can save humanity. Erin found herself cheering wildly along with all the others. Her previous frustration with the tedium of her job was washed away in a wave of enthusiasm and joy. It had all been totally worth it. Humanity was saved. Dr. Welchik didn't bother trying to stop the cheering, which eventually turned into applause, and then a standing ovation. He simply beamed out at the audience with a big, bearded grin, as all the interns and even the technicians in the back applauded, whistled and cheered loudly. Finally, the outburst started to die down, and Dr. Welchik lifted his hand to get everyone's attention. Soon, all eyes were once again focused on him. There is, however, one small problem. Perhaps it's not an insurmountable problem, but it is one we need to take into consideration. Show the next video, please. Erin focused on the screen again, as a new image popped up. She blinked in confusion for a moment, not sure at what she was seeing, and then suddenly it resolved itself. She was looking at a top-down view of a large town, with winding streets and brightly colored rooftops. She felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. As you can see, Dr. Welchik said, this world is inhabited. He waved off the moans of disappointment from the crowd. Now, none of that. It's inhabited, yes, but the population density is nowhere near that of the Earth, at least in the regions we've been able to see so far. Granted, that's only a small portion of this world, as there is something about this one that makes matching harmonics with it. Well, tricky, to say the least. But it's entirely possible that we can coexist with the inhabitants. But first, we need to learn more about them. Because, you see, they aren't exactly human. Erin's breath caught in her throat, and she heard several others gasp as well. Just finding out that there were other worlds within reach that could support life was thrilling enough. However, intelligent, non-human life was something, well, shocking. Even though it was a known possibility, to hear it stated as fact was simply incredible. Now, this is one of the larger settlements we've found. For the most part, they appear to be a community of farmers. It seems fairly similar to the USA in the mid-1800s, actually. If they turn out to be hostile or inhospitable, we could, if we wanted to, simply move in by force and take what we needed. Erin's stomach churned at the thought. On the one hand, it was the human race's very survival they were talking about. On the other, just the very thought of human beings being like the alien invaders in the science fiction novels she read made her distinctly uncomfortable. She tried to put it out of her mind as Dr. Velchik continued talking. We'd much rather coexist, of course, but we're talking about the future of the human race here. We're talking about our survival as a species, and we're talking about billions of lives. Naturally, we're still looking for other viable alternate worlds while we study this one. Maybe we can find an uninhabited one that is similar enough to the Earth that we could move there, instead. If not, Dr. Velchik continued, then it's entirely possible that they would be friendly and welcome us into their world. They seem friendly enough as it is. We'd still like to get some people over there to study them, unobtrusively, but for now we're just watching everything we can whenever we're able to get a window open. Which is anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes on average, once or twice a week. And now, he said with a chuckle, I bet you're all just dying to see what our alien intelligence looks like. He smiled out once again at the brief, but loud affirmation from his audience. Last video, please, he said to the technicians. Erin focused her attention once again on the screen. Nobody in the audience even made a peep. Dr. Velchik, however, continued talking, speaking as if he were narrating a nature documentary. And here we see some lovely rolling hillsides, with a fairly large forest off to the west. As you can see, it's a pleasant day. Small insects buzz by, and there you can see a few rabbits grazing on the grass. And what's this coming up over the hillside? Why, it's a collection of this world's most highly developed inhabitants. Erin stared as several multicolored shapes appeared at the crest of the hill. As you can see, they are. Oh my god, ponies. Erin looked around in a panic, blushing furiously. Everyone was staring at her. Dr. Velchik looked positively annoyed. She'd gone and blurted that out loud, hadn't she? Yes. Yes, she had. Dr. Velchik harumphed and continued on. Yes, well, ponies. Though, obviously nothing like what we find here on Earth. Note the bright colors. You'd never see a bright purple pony running around here on Earth, unless its owner had dyed its coat the color. Also, these ponies talk. They use tools. They build things. And that's not all. Look at what you see here. Here come more ponies. And not all of them are walking. The auditorium exploded in chaos, interns leaping from their seats and pointing, talking, and at times shouting excitedly over one another. Oh wow, it's carrying a basket. Look at that. Is that one flying? Does it have wings? Look at that gray one. Oh, look, one has a foal. Isn't that just adorable? Those are wings. It's a winged pony. If they're so smart, why don't any of them wear clothes? Did you see that? Did you see that? No way those wings can support an animal that size in flight. Oh, man, is that a unicorn? An actual unicorn. That one's wearing a hat. Oh my god, this is so incredibly amazing. I can't believe we found intelligent life out there and it's ponies having a picnic and they look so cute and adorable and oh man, it's awesome that they can fly and the colors are so pretty and they're all smiling and look so happy and... Erin sputtered to a halt as she realized that she was rambling. Luckily nobody else seemed to notice, as they were all staring raptly at the screens and babbling away themselves. She returned her attention to the ponies frolicking on the screen. They were playing games, laughing, eating. One, a purple unicorn, was sitting on a blanket a little way away from the others, apparently reading a book that was propped against her picnic basket. It shouldn't surprise anyone, Dr. Velchik said, that my team has dubbed this place, Ponyworld. There was no response, as the interns were all staring raptly at the screen, chattering animatedly with each other. Ahem. The auditorium continued to ignore him. Ahem. When there was still no response from the audience, Dr. Velchik sighed and signaled the AV tech, who cut off the video. The interns all groaned in disappointment, but returned their attention to the podium. Now back to business, Dr. Velchik said, once the muttering had died down. We need to get a sense of the pony society. How is it organized? What are the people, ponies like? Are they religious? Do they have any needs that we could supply for them, in return for letting us live there? Are there any large areas of land that we could move our populations to? Basically, we need vast amounts of information. More than we can get by pushing probes out there and watching through the occasional window. And that's why I called you all together. He had their attention now. All eyes were glued on him. He was apparently savoring the moment as he smiled slyly and took a sip of water. What we need, essentially, are some volunteers. Erin's hand shot up almost of its own volition. Ah, well, that was fast. You're the, oh my god ponies girl, aren't you? What's your name, young lady? Erin, sir. Erin Olsen. And why are you volunteering for this project, when you don't know what we'll even ask of you? Erin thought about it for a moment. Well, sir, will this project involve staring at a small screen while making minuscule adjustments for 12-hour shifts? Dr. Velchik laughed, as did many of the interns in the auditorium. No, it will not. But it will involve being subject to an experimental harmonics gateway, being sent to this new world, and observing the ponies in their environment for some time while we gather data. And, also, you'll be undergoing surgery to have several various probes and sensors inserted into your body, in order to better facilitate our data gathering. Erin noticed her arm started drooping as the professor went on. Staying there, she thought she'd just help with observation. And what was that about surgery? Being turned into some sort of living cyborg probe thing didn't sound like a wise thing to do. Plus, what if the ponies, as cute and sweet-natured as they seemed, turned out to be hostile? Then again, the entire human race was at stake, which was why she spent the last 6 months doing permanent damage to her eyes by staring at that stupid harmonics screen. Someone had to do it. Someone had to take the risk. Besides, anything would be better than another few months of staring at that screen. She forced her arm back up. I'm in, she said, resolutely. Wonderful, Dr. Velchik said, with a grin breaking through his bearded face. Do we have any other takers? 3 others volunteered within the next few minutes, and one more hesitantly raised her hand as Dr. Velchik continued to alternately plead, cajole, and entice others to volunteer. After another 5 minutes of no more raised hands, it became clear that he had all the volunteers he was going to get. Well, then, he said, clearly not satisfied but determined to put a good face on it, we have 5 volunteers. 5 brave souls who are willing to go the distance and face the unknown, and... apparently that last young lady has reconsidered. Very well, 4 brave souls. Stand up, then, you wonderful people. Stand up, we salute you. Erin stood up, blushing furiously, as Dr. Velchik led a round of applause for her and the other volunteers. The applause continued for longer than it should have, then slowly and awkwardly died down. Erin remained standing, unsure of what to do next. Dr. Velchik had apparently forgotten about them, and was leafing through some papers at the podium. She caught the eyes of another volunteer, a young man she knew as Adam. He shrugged, and then motioned towards the podium. Erin shrugged as well, and when Adam started to make his way down the aisle, she did as well. The other two volunteers also made their way down and they all stood, uncertainly, on the floor next to the raised stage where the podium resided. Finally, Adam cleared his throat. What? Dr. Velchik looked around, startled. Oh, yes, of course. Everyone, thank you for coming today. Feel free to take an hour of celebration at the cafeteria before returning to work. We still need to find other viable alternate worlds, just in case this, Pony World, doesn't pan out. Then, as the other interns started filtering out the back of the auditorium, Dr. Velchik turned to the four volunteers and smiled warmly. Ah, my dear volunteers. Wonderful, wonderful. Please, for now, join your peers and get something to eat. It's a special day. We ordered in cake and ice cream. It's waiting in the cafeteria. Mention that you're a volunteer, and you should get an extra large slice. Here you go. And with that, he handed each of them a folder with a few papers in it. Read those over as soon as you can, after the cake of course, and meet me in conference room 4C in 3 hours. There are a few things we need to go over. Erin opened her folder, as did the other three volunteers. It just seemed to be a standard release form, a confidentiality agreement and a medical checklist. Well, said Adam, that was sure interesting. But for now, let's go get some cake. Chapter 2, Gathering Data. Conference room 4C turned out to be one of the larger rooms, dominated by a large oak table. Erin and the other three volunteers shuffled in, full of cake and high spirits. She was a bit alarmed to see two armed guards standing on either side of the door, but they didn't try to stop them from going in. There were a number of people waiting for them, all grouped at the far end away from the door, relaxing and chatting in the high-backed black leather chairs. The volunteers were encouraged to have seats close to the current occupants, leaving most of the room empty. We were really hoping for a few more volunteers, said one of the people in the room, a scientist Erin recognized as Dr. Maggie Henson, who was her boss and head of the harmonics emitter team. She turned to one of her fellow scientists and added, I told Paul we should have expanded our selection beyond just the interns. The other scientist shrugged. He said he wanted to keep it in-house. There didn't seem to be much to say to that, so Erin fiddled with the paperwork Dr. Velchik had given her as the others introduced themselves. In addition to Dr. Henson, there was a Dr. Alden Rowe, Chief of Medicine, Dr. Herman Fisher, who was in charge of something apparently called Project Ascent and who spoke with a slight Austrian accent, and a short, thin, middle-aged man who didn't give his first name and simply identified himself as Dr. Edwards. The last man to introduce himself was Major Mitchell Morris, who said he was there as a military observer. As the introductions were wrapping up, Dr. Velchik walked in and seated himself at the head of the table. Have we all already introduced ourselves to each other? Yes, good. Let's get right into it, then. First and foremost, did you all have a chance to go through your paperwork? The volunteers all assured him they had. Good deal, Dr. Velchik said, beaming. First thing, then, is that we need you all to sign the confidentiality agreement. Basic non-disclosure, under penalty of treason, of any information that you may be told in here. Do any of you have any questions? No, then sign away, my wonderful volunteers. Erin felt a bit nervous and, judging by the looks on their faces, so did the others. However, with only a slight amount of hesitation, she and the others all signed the documents and handed them over to Dr. Velchik. Good, he said as he gathered the papers together into a manila folder. Now that is out of the way, I have to say that we're going to be introducing you to some very radical concepts here. Not only the cybernetic implants, which I touched upon very briefly during the meeting, but some cutting-edge stuff that anyone out in the world today would tell you is nothing but science fiction. I have to warn you that there's no going back after this point. You can still refuse to participate, once you hear the offer. But if you decline, you will be kept separate from the rest of the personnel on site. That's non-negotiable, I'm afraid. Your only contact will be with other people who have the same information that you do, at least until this particular project has run its course. Any who wish to leave may do so now, with no hard feelings, and go back to the scanner arrays. Erin could see fear in the eyes of the other interns, and she was sure they could see the same in hers. One of the volunteers got up, a woman perhaps in her late 20s. She made her excuses, blushing furiously, and then walked quickly out the door. A guard poked his head into the conference room, but Dr. Velchik shook his head and said that she was free to go. The guard nodded and closed the door again. Ah, well, said Dr. Velchik, not as bad as I was expecting. Well, if the rest of you are very sure. Good, then let's get into some of the data that we know. Dr. Velchik clicked a button on the table in front of him, and the lights in the room dimmed. A screen at the back of the room lit up, and suddenly filled with the same pastoral scene that Erin remembered first seeing when Ponyworld was introduced. There were a few things that we kept from the others. We collected some video and carefully edited it to keep out some of the more extraordinary aspects of this world. First of all, here you see one of the horned ponies, what most of my staff are calling a unicorn, which seems apt enough. What you didn't see was, well, just watch. Erin watched carefully as a pony trotted into view, smiling gently as she trotted along. Now that she could take a closer look, she noticed that the pony looked only superficially like a pony from Earth. This one's head was rounder, with larger eyes and a higher forehead. Also, horses and ponies on Earth didn't smile, in her experience. Nor did they have what looked like a tattoo of a four-leaf clover on their rumps. Also, something else seemed slightly off about her. Erin blinked, and then suddenly noticed that the unicorn's horn was glowing slightly, a pale green a shade or two lighter than her coat. Then, something amazing happened. Several branches on the ground were enveloped in a similar colored glow, and then rose into the air and sped towards the unicorn. She turned, and trotted back the way she came, branches in tow. Erin became aware that her mouth was hanging open, so she shut it. As you can see, the unicorns seem to possess a telekinetic ability. We suspect that the winged ponies also have some sort of TK ability as well, which enables them to fly. As you can see, there is simply no way that their wingspan, even in Ponyworld's slightly lower gravity, could support a creature of that size. At least, not without the creature being so light that its mass wouldn't be able to overcome air resistance to allow it to move forward. This wasn't the only example of telekinesis we'd seen from these remarkable ponies, Dr. Velchik said. We've seen many others. He tapped again on the console in front of him, and the video shifted. Several unicorns flashed by on the screen above. A blue one, apparently male and with a white mane and a safety pin tattoo, who was trotting along with a bag full of what seemed to be apples floating beside him. A yellow one with a blue mane was using her telekinesis to put a hat on her head. And, finally, there was a lavender one with a darker purple mane with a pink streak and a pattern that looked like a starburst for a tattoo. She was walking down the street and apparently reading from the book that she was levitating in front of her. Aaron thought that seemed a little bit on the dangerous side. Obviously, the telekinesis presents a great unknown factor. This is one way in which this world is different than ours. Who knows how many others there may be. How do you get all these videos? Aaron asked, amazed. Glad you asked. The drones that we sent over are very small, programmed to evade notice, and have simply the best cameras money can buy. They stay some distance outside of town, zooming in on whatever their programming takes a fancy to. Sir, said Adam, what's the significance of the tattoos on their hindquarters? That, Dr. Velchik replied, scratching his beard. We honestly don't know. All of the adults have them. It seems to be some sort of ritualistic, rite of passage, into adulthood kind of thing, but we're really not sure. We have catalogued a few of these, but there seems to be almost no correlation between the pony and the tattoo. Outside of the different types of pony, that is. What do you mean? Aaron asked. Well, there are the 3 different kinds of ponies, as you see. At least, if there are any other kinds, we haven't seen them yet. The basic kind is the one without horns or wings. They seem to be mostly laborers and farmers, or craftsmen. Or crafts-ponies, I suppose. They tend to have more down-to-earth kinds of marks. Various kinds of plants, fruits, flowers, tools, that sort of thing. The unicorns, though, they tend to have more along the lines of artistic, mystical or scientific types of marks. Stars, for example, or paintbrushes. I saw one with an hourglass, even. The winged ponies tend to have ones based on weather, such as clouds, rainbows, that kind of thing. There is some crossing back and forth, such as the unicorn we saw earlier with the clover mark, but our best guess is that it is some kind of caste system, with the plain ponies most likely on the bottom, though there doesn't seem to be any real social separation between the classes. Aaron was fascinated. There were so many unknowns. So, basically, Dr. Velchik continued, we want you to go and infiltrate pony society. Find out how things work there. Try the local food, so you can give the senses we'll implant in your digestive tracts the ability to analyze the nutritional content of it. Mingle with the ponies, learn how the economy works, what the difference is between the classes of ponies besides the obvious. Find out how the government works, that kind of thing. Basically, just gather any and all information that you can, as quickly as you can. Adam laughed briefly. And how are we supposed to do that? Just walk up to them and say, hi there, little ponies, I'm an alien that wants to gather information about your world. How would they even understand us? I doubt they speak English. That's one of the most amazing things, Dr. Velchik replied, chuckling. One of the probes we managed to get across happened to pick up a brief conversation as a couple of ponies wandered by underneath it. Apparently, they speak perfect English. Honestly, I was still too shocked by the telekinesis to be much bothered about that, but it is, perhaps, the most astounding thing, I'm sure you'll agree. As for the other thing, he said, clearing his throat and looking mildly uncomfortable, you won't be aliens at all. We planned to, well, to turn you into ponies. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, what? Aaron said after a minute. She couldn't have heard him right. Yes, into ponies. Dr. Fisher, if you could take over. Certainly, Paul. The scrawny old Austrian doctor straightened in his seat and punched a button on his own control panel. The visions of Ponyworld and its colorful, wonderful inhabitants faded from view, to be replaced by what looked like very strange, slightly mechanical and oily-looking grains of rice. I work on Project Ascent. This project had one goal in mind, to figure out how to counter the Black Tide's nefarious little nanomachines with nanomachines under our own control. Unfortunately, their machines are much more advanced than ours, and simply consume them like they consume everything else. In any case, what you see here is the fruit of our labor. Each of these little pellets is invisible to the naked eye and yet has the ability to rearrange matter in much the same way that the Tide's own nanomachines can. Only, in this case, we can control it. I'm done, said the third volunteer, a young man that Aaron knew as Richard. No way that's going to work for me, sorry. This sounds way too mad scientist to me. Very well, said Dr. Velchik, disappointment evident in his voice. He stood and escorted the young man out the door, where he murmured briefly to the guards standing outside the doorway. Richard was escorted away by one of the guards, and Dr. Velchik returned to the head of the table, lowering into his seat with a heavy sigh. And then there were two. Please continue, Dr. Fisher. Yes. Of course. The Austrian fiddled with his pen briefly, obviously trying to recollect his thoughts. Finally, he continued. The procedure is perfectly safe, I assure you. We will turn you into ponies, of the plain variety, and give you what we hope will be an appropriate mark on your flanks. Aaron felt a brief moment of disappointment. Not that the thought of being turned into a pony by what appeared to be, admittedly, a mad scientist didn't scare the willies out of her, but... Why can't we be a winged ponies? She asked. I'd like to be able to fly. Dr. Fisher seemed mildly amused by that. If you can tell us how they fly, and describe for us the anatomy of their wings, he said, then indeed we'd be happy to make you over into a winged pony. As it is, though, we have no idea how to replicate the abilities of the horned and winged ponies that you see in our videos. Aaron was surprised to note that she was feeling disappointed by that. It wasn't like there was any chance that she would actually let these people remake her body into that of a pony. Was there? Dr. Fisher continued. We can do this, we assure you. We've already done significant animal testing, and we believe we have the flaws worked out. And you have my personal word, broke in Dr. Velchik, that you will be turned back at the first opportunity when you return from Ponyworld. And, just to sweeten the pot, if helping to save the world isn't enough, I will personally guarantee that you will be compensated well enough that you will never have to work again. Also, you will be heroes the world over, once this is all said and done. So, what do you say? Erin exchanged a long, doubtful look with Adam. Where did this technology come from? Adam asked. I've never heard of anything like this, ever. This seems like it's years beyond anything we're capable of. Dr. Fisher looked uncomfortable. He looked at Dr. Welchik, who shrugged and nodded. We have studied the nanomachines of the Tide, Dr. Fisher confessed. We were able to retrieve some damaged ones and figure out some of the properties by which they work. Our own nanomachines were built using that knowledge. So, you're saying you're planning on using technology based off of the Black Tide to turn us into ponies, Adam said flatly. Both Dr. Welchik and Fisher confirmed that this was true. Then I also have to say, no, sorry, said Adam. I agree with Richard, this is just too crazy. Sorry, Erin, looks like it's down to you. Erin felt her heart racing as Dr. Welchik escorted Adam out the door and into the hands of the waiting guard outside, who took him away. And then there was one, Dr. Welchik said, as he lowered himself to his seat. What do you say, Erin, was it? The fate of the world rests in your hands. No, the fate of two worlds. Ours and theirs. Because I guarantee you, whether or not we gather the information we need, humanity is moving into Ponyworld in about 8 months' time. We already have emitter stations going up all over the world in preparation for the event. We plan on doing this as diplomatically as possible, but the survival of the human race has to take precedence. The information you gather could make that transition so much easier on both species. Will you do it? Sir, she glanced away. She never liked being put on the spot, and here she was being told that she was partly responsible for the fate of the human race. Oh, and the mostly unknown pony race, come to think of it. Why did I ever volunteer in the first place? She thought miserably. If I'd known this was going to be based on Tide technology. Can I sleep on it? She asked finally. Dr. Welchik agreed and then escorted her to the doorway himself. The others in the room went their own separate ways. One of the guards had returned by this point, but Dr. Welchik waved him off and walked her down to a specially prepared dorm himself. The whole way, he kept up a steady monologue about the good of humanity, saving the Earth, and how she could be one of the heroes of the modern world, much like the astronauts who walked on the moon almost a century ago. She really wished he'd stop talking. It was making it hard for her to think. Finally, they reached another guarded door. Well, here you are, my dear. I really hope you take us up on this opportunity. You'll be doing everyone a lot of good, if you agree. And with that, Dr. Welchik turned and left. Erin entered the doorway and looked around. She was in a large sitting area, with several screens on the walls, though none of them were on at the moment. The central area had a large sofa and several comfortable-looking chairs. There were bookshelves around the walls, and off to one side she saw a bar and a decent-sized kitchen area. Richard and Adam looked up as she entered, apparently interrupting their conversation. Well, that didn't take long, Adam said with a grin. I didn't think anyone would go for that. It's just too crazy. Actually, Erin said hesitantly, I haven't made up my mind, yet. Both Richard and Adam gaped at her. You have got to be kidding, Richard said, looking astounded. They want to break your body down and recreate it. Recreate it as a stupid horse. Using technology inspired by the Black Tide. How can you even consider that? Because a lot of lives are at stake, that's how. Don't be stupid, Adam said, rolling his eyes. Nobody is going to die. We've got a world to move into. Getting information is pointless. We're going in whether or not those ponies like it. And if they fight us, well, we're not exactly leaving any of our military hardware behind, are we? I doubt those winged ponies can outfly a jet. Both he and Richard started joking about how overmatched the ponies would find themselves against fighter jets, tanks, and helicopters. She thought back to the videos they had all seen. Ponies laughing and playing, talking and reading, building things, farming things, a community, and one that seemed to be happy and cohesive. She had a sudden vision of what was going to happen. Ready or not, humanity was going to pour through harmonics gateways by the millions. No, by the billions. People in general weren't bad, but with the survival of the entire species at risk, would the plight of these little ponies even be considered? Almost definitely not. Not unless someone went in and came back with information. These ponies were living, thinking creatures, and unless that information came out, Erin was afraid that they'd be treated as little better than animals by a good portion of humanity. And maybe even worse, by some people. Talking animals. That would seem a threat to certain kinds of people. Erin was convinced that most people were good and kind in the world, but even still, she knew that there were plenty of small-minded racists and xenophobes out there. If there were people that hated other people based on nothing more than skin color, how many people would hate the ponies based on actual species? The full weight of it suddenly hit her. Dr. Welchik was completely right. It was two worlds, not one, that hung in the balance. And the one that was in greater danger was Ponyworld. She made up her mind. Turning, she opened the door she had just walked through. The guards jumped a little, and one of them raised a hand as if to bar her. Sorry, ma'am, he began, but you can't leave. Please send for Dr. Welchik, she said, cutting him off. Tell him I've made up my mind. Chapter 3, Decisions. It was an hour later, and Dr. Welchik was beside himself with joy as he escorted Erin into yet another conference room. He was talking a steady stream of encouragement and reassurance, which Erin barely listened to. She felt almost like she was walking through a daydream, it all felt so unreal. It felt surreal to Erin, to be sitting there and calmly discussing having her entire body redesigned and manipulated into that of a pony. She couldn't believe she was actually planning on doing this. A small part of her mind was screaming warnings at her, and she did her best to block that voice out. Very well, he said, once everyone was seated, we can now get into more of the details involved in this project, which we are calling Project Insertion. Really, that's the best we've got. He sighed and shook his head. All right, then, we're going to have each head go through and give you a brief summary of what we're doing. First things first, Maggie. Thank you, Paul. She turned to address Erin, passing her a tablet. Erin took it, but didn't turn it on. It seemed to be a fairly ordinary tablet, touch screen, like everyone else in the world had these days. That tablet has all of the data that we've collected from Ponyworld up to this point. All video, all pictures, all scientific data, as well as all of our best guesses as to what pony society is like. Please study that in depth, and don't allow anyone else to see it. It's key to your thumbprint. Please turn it on now. Erin pressed her thumb to the corner of the screen, which immediately lit up. The logo, Project Insertion, came up on the screen, with the words Top Secret, Authorized Personnel Only, written in red underneath. Thank you, Dr. Henson, she said, tapping on the logo. It vanished, to be replaced by an index. There were several sections, including a video section, a data section, an analysis section, and a section on various pony tattoos. Oh, please, she said, smiling, now that we're working together, you can call me Maggie. Erin smiled back. Thank you, Maggie, she said. You're quite welcome, dear. You can continue to call me, Doctor, said Dr. Edwards tersely. I'd like to get my part of this out of the way, if you don't mind. I have to get back to my labs as soon as possible. We're still developing the implants we're going to be using for this little field trip, and I'll need all the time I can get in order to get them completed on time. Certainly, Dr. Edwards, said Dr. Belchik, after a slightly awkward pause. Please continue. Very well. Young lady, open the tablet under the part of the index titled, Cybernetics. I'll take you through a brief rundown of what we're hoping to accomplish. Erin did so, feeling a little intimidated by the crabby scientist. You'll see that, for the most part, the implants will be chemical analyses of various sorts. You will have several in your digestive system, analyzing the chemical and nutritional content of the food you eat. You'll have further sensors in your nostrils and lungs, analyzing everything from the composition of the air you breathe to the pollen and dust that you manage to inhale. Your eyes will be given a boost. They'll have spectral analyzers built in, so you can measure various sorts of radiation, beyond those normally visible. Don't worry, you won't be distracted by any of that. You will perceive only the normal information that your current eyes do. However, we were also told to give you whatever physical advantages we could, so you will be able to, tap into both night vision and infrared vision. Also, your eyes will be able to see far more clearly at further distances than any organic eye would be able to. You'd be able to read a postage stamp from a mile away, if you wanted to do so for some reason. Keep in mind, though, that this focus will make you extremely far-sighted until you return your eyesight to normal. Your ears will be much the same. They will pick up and record sounds far outside your normal range of hearing, but they won't pass on anything too far outside the normal range. Once again, though, you should be able to focus your hearing to an extent that you'll be able to hear far beyond what any animal is capable of without augmentation. There is also information storage and retrieval, and a communications array. You will have a data storage device implanted in your body, and whenever we can, we will open a window to download the data you've collected, in order to analyze it here. Also, you will have a microphone built into your jaw, and a small speaker in your ears. This is in order to give us the ability to communicate with you while in the field, so that we can give you instruction if needed. Dr. Belchik broke in at that point, to say, in addition, we're asking that you keep a log. Just speak normally, and the microphone will pick it up and record it. Include any thoughts you have on the ponies you meet, the society you've come in contact with, any feelings or intuitions you may have, that kind of thing. Yes, Dr. Edwards said, sounding annoyed. All the touchy-feely stuff that apparently we won't be able to discern for ourselves as we go through the data. Now, if you don't have any questions, I'd like to be on my way. Yes, actually, I do have a question, Erin said, trying to ignore Dr. Edwards' grumbling. Is there any way I'd be able to turn the recorder off for short periods of time? Dr. Edwards looked at her as if she'd asked him to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Why, he said after a moment, in a voice made of icicles, in the name of all that's holy, would we ever make it so that the recorder could be turned off? Well, sometimes. A girl wants some privacy, you know. Erin was blushing. My dear girl, he shot back condescendingly, if you want to have some hanky-panky with the local stallions, I'm sure that's your own concern, but don't. No. God, no, are you kidding me? Erin was now beet red and mortified. I was talking about normal things like having to go to the bathroom or whatever. I don't want you guys watching that. Good God, you thought I was talking about sex. What is wrong with you? There was general laughter in the room after Erin's outburst. Only she and Dr. Edwards weren't laughing, Erin because she was too angry and embarrassed, and Dr. Edwards because he was affronted. My dear, he said once the laughter died down, if you think that I'm going to cater. Oh, Tom, just do it, okay. Dr. Henson broke in. It's not that big of a deal, is it? Just put a pause function in the recorder, and have it auto-restart after 20 minutes if she forgets to turn it back on, or something. Are we seriously going to compromise our research in order to cater to the whims of this girl's modesty? Dr. Edwards snapped back. Tom, said Dr. Belchik in a reasonable but firm tone, she's agreeing to undergo the most radical body modification and surgery ever attempted, and then be the first human ever to be sent to an alien world. I think a little catering to whims is the least we can do to make it easier on her. Dr. Edwards glared around the room briefly, and saw that he had no allies there. Fine, he grated. I'll do it. Now if you'll excuse me, these further modifications will take even more time and even more of my attention. Good day to you all. And with that, Dr. Edwards stormed out of the room. Erin breathed a sigh of relief. She really didn't like that man. After a moment, Dr. Belchik spoke again. He's really not a bad man, Erin, he said, softly. He, like many of us, is just under an ungodly amount of pressure. Ordinarily, he's about the most even-tempered man you'd care to meet. Erin nodded mutely, still upset from the earlier exchange. Dr. Fisher was up next, and Erin, with some difficulty, turned her attention to him. She rapidly forgot about the antagonistic Dr. Edwards as the kind-sounding Austrian man spoke. Like Dr. Henson, Erin, I would like you to call me by my first name. We're going to be working together for a while, after all, and a little familiarity will go a long way towards making things go smoother. So, please, call me Herman. Erin managed a weak smile, still feeling slightly shaken up. Thank you, Herman. Of course, he said, smiling. Now, my team is in charge of designing and building the actual body that all of Dr. Edwards' lovely toys will go into. We started with a basic design, based on the ponies you would find here in our world, but we rapidly ran into problems. As you watch the videos, you will see that the ponies of that other world have fantastic degrees of dexterity, both in their forelimbs and hooves, as well as with their jaws and mouths. The plain ponies, as well as the winged ones, don't have telekinesis to move things about, and yet they manage to carry and build things all the same. It took a considerable amount of work for us to be able to design joints, muscles and tendons that not only could duplicate the Ponyworld ponies' actions, but would also look like theirs do. In addition to this, as Dr. Edwards mentioned, we were told to give you all the benefits that we could, in order to ensure your safety. To that end, you will be physically much stronger than any creature that size has a right to be, able to lift several times your own weight easily. You will have endurance and speed far beyond what you would ordinarily have. In addition, your skeletal structure will be enhanced to be able to support the weights and speeds that you will be capable of. Furthermore, your reflexes, coordination, and muscle memory will be enhanced as much as possible. It shouldn't take you long at all to get used to your new body, and to pick up any tricks you need to once you actually arrive in Ponyworld. And one last thing. We've seen the ponies eat vegetation, and apparently some kinds of breads. However, we're not sure what else they may eat. Rather than making you a pure vegetarian, we've made your digestive system capable of processing almost anything organic. You won't be able to be poisoned easily, and you won't starve as long as there is something organic nearby that you can actually chew and swallow. What about the flank tattoo? Erin asked. What will that be? From what I understand, Erin, you will be allowed to pick whatever it is you like, from a pre-approved list that you should find on that tablet that Maggie gave you. Oh, Erin glanced at the tablet again, suppressing an urge to start going through it right away. That is, in summary, what we're planning on having as the end result. Did you have any questions? Yes. Erin considered for a moment, then asked, can you tell me exactly how this is going to work? What are you going to do to me? Well. Basically, what we do is we program the nanomachines with the end result we have in mind. Then we put you in a nutrient solution that is filled with these nanomachines. They enter your body, and they change you on a cell-by-cell basis. In addition, the actual surgery will be automated, but overseen by the best doctors we have. Once your skeleton is rendered malleable, it will be manually reshaped by the various robotic limbs in the vat. Erin stared at him in disbelief. Did this guy just say her skeleton would be rendered malleable? It made sense, but her stomach flipped over gently at the thought, and she did her best to put it out of her mind as the doctor continued his explanation. It works in stages. Each stage that passes, you will be a little less human-like, and a little more pony-like. Altogether, the process should take about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Erin's desire to run, screaming, out of the room ratcheted up another notch. And, will it hurt? Oh, no, my dear, of course not. Dr. Fisher shook his head emphatically. For you, the time will pass like nothing. You will be unconscious the entire time, while we tend the process and make any adjustments needed. You will simply go to sleep on one day, then wake up on another, as a pony. The process to reverse the change will work much the same way, only this time we'll have a template to go off of, so it will be much smoother. We would be able to return you to your current form in about a week or so. And, if you like, said Dr. Velchik, we can include some of the upgrades that you will have had as a pony. The enhanced reflexes, strength, and so on. Consider it a positive side effect, if you want. Erin considered that for a moment. It would be kind of cool to be essentially a superhero when she got done with this. I'll think about it, she said. Well, that's about it for the presentations, Dr. Velchik said. Did you have any other questions? It turns out that she did. The conversation lasted another hour or so, as Erin came up with question after question. How long was she going to be in Ponyworld? As long as it took, but no longer than a few months. What if they couldn't bring her back? That wasn't even possible, she was assured. As long as they had the equipment and the harmonics wavelength, they could tune into Ponyworld and, eventually, find her, using the implants she had in her new pony body. What if something happened, and she ended up dead or worse than dead, either from the procedure or from other unforeseen circumstances? In that case, her parents would be informed, and, if she was still alive, she would be cared for as best as they were able to do for the rest of her life. Also, she would be remembered as a hero. What kinds of things could she discuss with the ponies? Could she mention humans? Under no circumstances was she to mention humans, or the plans to migrate the human population to Ponyworld. Her mission was not diplomatic, it was to gather information. That may change, she was told, but it wasn't up to her to bring up the subject without authorization. When would the actual ponification process, for lack of a better word, take place? At the end of the week, in about 4 days' time. Finally, the meeting wrapped up. Dr. Velchik told her to study up on the information on the tablet she was given, and she was reminded once again not to share the information on it with anyone who wasn't currently in the room, or Dr. Edwards, if she thought she could get a civil word out of him. Once again, Dr. Velchik escorted her back to the dorm she was staying in, the whole way heaping praise on her for her bravery and courage, telling her that she would be remembered as a hero for as long as humanity survived. So, it's important that we make sure that humanity survives, right? He said, laughing as they approached the door. Erin joined in, laughing weakly, feeling completely overwhelmed and in shock. Dr. Velchik took her hand in both of his, and shook it solemnly. This is important work, Erin. You'll see. You're doing a great service to your species, and I thank you, most sincerely. Erin managed to mumble something in return, and then stumbled through the guarded door back into the dorms. Richard and Adam were still sitting on the couch, though now they were watching a football game on one of the big screens in the room. Adam grabbed the remote and muted it. Wow, he said, I wasn't expecting to see you again, at least as a human. Aren't you supposed to be a pony now? Or did you chicken out? I didn't chicken out, she said, as Richard sniggered. Honestly, they were supposed to be college students, scientists in training. Did they have to act like her little brothers? It's going to take a few days for them to get ready, and in the meanwhile, I have to study. Oh, okay, fine. He stood up and walked over to her. Erin, I'm sorry I made fun of you. I really, honestly think this is an amazingly brave thing you're doing. Crazy, but brave. He held out his hand and, after a moment's hesitation, Erin shook it. There are about 8 rooms here, all pretty good sized. No doubt they were hoping for a lot more in the way of volunteers, but were the only ones they got. Go ahead and find the room with your stuff in it. They moved it all in while we were stuffing our faces with cake earlier. And, if you don't like the room they gave you, go ahead and move into any of the empty ones. Sounds good. Thanks, Adam. No problem, he said, waving as he walked back to the couch. Erin went to look for her room, and heard the volume come back on for the football game. She found her room on the third try, one of the doors being locked, which she guessed belonged either to Richard or Adam. The room itself was, as Adam had said, very large. There were 4 single beds in it, a large video screen on one wall, and a desk by each bed. Her belongings were stacked by the foot of one of the beds, and Erin decided on a whim to claim that bed as her own. Suddenly exhausted beyond rational thought from the stress brought about by the day's events, she flopped down into the bed, intending to rest just for a moment. She was sound asleep less than a minute later. The next few days passed by faster than she'd expected while Erin tried her best to focus on the materials presented. She watched every video multiple times, trying to get a feel for how the ponies interacted with each other. It seemed really relaxed and casual. She read the reports, noting with interest that the makeup of the air was similar to Earth's almost to an astonishing degree. Gravity was slightly weaker, though, which might help to explain a little about why the winged ponies could fly. She listened to the one audio snippet they had of ponies talking, over and over again. It was amazingly perfect English with no discernible accent. Just one pony, walking by, saying to another, and she makes the most amazing muffins I've ever eaten. Okay, so ponies baked, and apparently they had muffins. Pony bakers, who knew? That was definitely something she'd have to check out. As the days passed, Dr. Fisher and Dr. Velchik would pester her from time to time, asking her about the flank tattoo that she'd want. She went through the list of approved ones over and over again, but none of them really seemed to call out to her. She was on the verge of just picking one at random, when she decided to take a sanity break and just browse the internet for a while. She had no access to email or social networking sites. That was all heavily regulated as soon as she came on board Project Harmonic's main compound. However, there were a few approved news sites that she was allowed to browse through. Figuring that this would be the last chance she had in a while to get caught up on current events, she started reading. That's when it happened. She clicked on a link to a news story, and suddenly her screen filled up with a field full of sunflowers. The title of the article was Our Vanishing Land. Erin read the first few lines of the article. As the black tide continues its seemingly unstoppable march across our planet, and our government seems powerless to stop it, more and more people are clamoring for an escape route. As they should, since protecting humanity's survival is of paramount importance. But what of our forests and plains? Our lakes, parks and fields? Those are doomed to vanish, consumed by the tide in the single largest multi-species extinction event ever to have occurred on our planet. As plans advance for the possible evacuation of the human race, are any plans being made to save our precious plant and animal species? We're talking today to Dr. Ann Richter, head of the Conservation Committee. Erin stopped reading, and returned her attention to the sunflowers. They look so vital, so alive, growing in a vast field that seemingly stretched all the way to the horizon. This field, along with everything else on the planet, would soon be wiped out by the black tide. Intellectually, she had known that for years, but looking at this field, she felt a throb of cold despair in her chest. Nothing she could do could save this field of flowers. It would be consumed by the tide, like everything else. Something moved in Erin's heart, then. She may not be able to save this field, but sunflowers would grow again. Her work with Project Harmonics would make sure of that. She felt a growing determination, and a sense of rightness about that thought, and suddenly she knew what she wanted for her flank tattoo. It wasn't on the approved list, but she didn't care. It was going to be a sunflower, end of discussion. She left the dorms, one of the ever-present guards falling in behind her as she walked down the brightly lit hallways of the Harmonics compound, quickly reaching her destination of Dr. Fisher's office in the Project Ascent lab. After a short wait, she was escorted in, and was surprised to see both Herman and Dr. Velchik waiting for her in his office. They both greeted her warmly. Ah, my dear, Dr. Velchik said, pumping her hand with both of his, as was his habit. Have you finally decided on your flank tattoo? You know we're starting the process tomorrow. Yes, Dr. Velchik, I have. Excellent. What did you pick? The corn, perhaps the wheat stalks? No, she said, then held up the tablet with its field of sunflowers. I want this. The two scientists exchanged a glance. Well, it's not on the approved list, my dear, Dr. Velchik began. Erin shook her head and cut him off. I don't care. It's going to be a sunflower. It just feels right. This article, and this picture, it moved me. It hit me, when I looked at this picture. This field may be gone in a few years' time, but a new field can be planted. And it can be just as beautiful as the original, if not more so. To me, this picture means hope, and it means renewal. Everything that Harmonics represents to me. You said to trust my intuition. Well, my intuition says it's got to be this. Well, it seems appropriate enough, said Dr. Fisher. After all, plants are pretty common, and I don't recall seeing another pony with a sunflower, which was the primary criterion for the initial selection of flank tattoos. Dr. Velchik considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well, my dear. If it's a sunflower you want, then it's a sunflower you'll get. Oh, it is, Erin said, nodding vigorously. And, if you don't mind, I have another suggestion, regarding the name of this particular project. I seem to remember you weren't too pleased with Project Insertion. Well, how about Project Sunflower? For hope, and for renewal, and to remind people what's at stake. Dr. Velchik stared at her for a moment, then started booming with laughter. That is an excellent suggestion. Project Sunflower, it is. They talked for a bit longer about the next day's upcoming events. Erin knew it all by heart, of course. She was to be here, ready to go, by 10 o'clock sharp. She'd be allowed to send a last letter to her parents, omitting certain details, of course, which would be sent as soon as she entered the nutrient bath in the Ascent labs. Then, in approximately 2 weeks, she'd awaken in a new body and undergo training in how to use it. Then, when she was ready, she'd be sent through the first available doorway they were able to make, and take her first steps into Ponyworld. Erin figured it was too late to back out now, even though the thought had occurred to her more than once over the last few days. At the very least, picking out her flank tattoo had made her feel more comfortable with the decision, as if she were taking some control over her destiny. Finally, she went back to her room. Richard and Adam were there, of course, playing video games and loudly trash-talking each other. Erin decided to take the rest of the night off, and asked if she could join them. After all, she had all the information on that tablet practically memorized by now. She was as prepared as she could be, apart from still being human. After a few hours of playing around, she decided to go to bed. She was pretty sure that she was too worked up about tomorrow's events to sleep. She lay down anyway. It turned out she was right. It took her almost 3 hours to fall asleep. Her alarm woke her up at 8:30 the next morning. Grumpily, she shut it off. She'd had nowhere near enough sleep and was feeling groggy. She made her way into her personal bathroom and showered, then got dressed in her most comfortable jeans and a sweater that had her high school mascot on it. The Mustangs. She'd never made the connection before, and now she found it oddly funny. She exited the room and found Adam in the kitchen, cooking away. "Ah, good morning," he said. "How do you like your eggs?" "You're cooking for me?" she asked, surprised. "Seems like the least I can do. Today's your last day as a human, right? At least for a while. I wanted to do something nice for you before you left." "Oh. You don't have to. Come on, please. I've already gotten started. Besides, you're kinda my hero for doing this." "Sheesh," she said, blushing, laying it on a little thick there, "aren't you?" "Scrambled, then. Scrambled it is. I can do scrambled. In fact, I'm a natural when it comes to scrambling eggs." They talked about small things while he cooked, where they were born and raised, what their families were like, where they each went to school. Eventually, breakfast was served. Scrambled eggs, ham, toast with grape jam. Erin stared at it for a moment, realizing that this was the last meal she'd eat as a human for, most likely, months. "Is everything okay?" Adam asked. "It doesn't look that bad, does it?" No, it looks good," Erin said, shaking herself out of it. "It was very sweet of you to cook for me, thank you." "Not a problem. I really like cooking." He looked down at his own plate, and Erin noticed with a shocked thrill that he seemed to be blushing. A thrill, and a slight bit of amused annoyance. Now is when he starts opening up. The morning she's going to become a pony. Wonderful timing. Erin smiled, then dug into her meal. The eggs were a little rubbery. The toast was slightly burnt. It was one of the most delicious meals she'd ever eaten. Richard came out of his room as they were finishing up, yawning widely. "Hey, where's my breakfast?" "Make your own breakfast, you lazy jerk," said Adam, good-naturedly. Richard started whining, in the overly dramatic fake way that he had when he thought he was being funny. Adam retorted that if he wanted to have breakfast made for him, he'd have to go volunteer to be a pony as well. Erin smiled as the boys fake fought for a while. It was distracting her from the clock, which was good. When it reached 9:50, she decided that it was time to go. She said her goodbyes to Richard and Adam, both of whom hugged her. Though, Adam hugged her slightly longer and whispered, "Stay safe," into her ear as they separated. Erin felt like crying a little as she left. Chapter 4, To be a Pony. Erin groaned and opened her eyes. Too bright. She closed them again. She felt nauseous, like the room was slowly spinning and tilting. She also felt completely exhausted, but somehow too wired to sleep. Sounds, smells, everything was too sharp, too present. The assault to her senses was too much. She wanted to be sick, but there didn't seem to be anything in her stomach. She smelled disinfectant, soap, people, hospital smells, beeps and whistles and pings, hospital noises. Deduction, she was in a hospital. She hoped the accident hadn't been too bad. Oddly, she was having a hard time really caring. Probably the sedatives, she thought. She tried opening her eyes again. Nope, still too bright. She closed them again. After a while, she drifted back to sleep. Odd dreams. Disjointed, random images flashing by. There were ponies, galloping across a plain, birds flying, and she was one of them. No, she was a doll. And some horrible child dressed in surgeon scrubs was getting ready to take her apart. That last one was very unpleasant. There was no time, that she could tell. Eventually, she floated up out of the depths of sleep like a dumpling rising from the depths of soup. Well, I feel better, she thought, but my similes sure do suck. She heard footsteps approach her bed. She opened her eyes. It was Dr. Fisher. He was saying something she couldn't quite make out. He looked so serious. He was too nice to be so serious. She tried to think of something funny to say to make him smile. Erin isn't in right now. Please leave a message after the beep. Beep. Only, her mouth wasn't working right. So what came out instead was mumble bub mumble blue. Beep. She started giggling. It was too ridiculous. I'll come back later, Erin, okay. But just so you know, the operation was a perfect success. I'll see you later. Get some more rest, okay? She tried to assure him that she was fine, that it was just that her mouth was weird and her eyes were too heavy, but that she was perfectly fine, perfectly fine. Instead there was more mumbling, and possibly some drool, in the middle of which she fell asleep again. *****. Erin slowly became aware of the fact that she was awake. She was in what looked like a hospital room, and she could kind of feel her body, but she couldn't really move it. That was worrisome. She blinked slowly and tried to look around, but her head didn't want to move properly. Plus, it felt way too heavy in the wrong places, and way too light in the others. I suppose I'm a pony now, she thought. Maybe it was the remaining sedatives in her system. Maybe she had just reached the point where nothing really shocked her anymore. But she simply had a hard time caring. She was content to just lay there, feeling mellow and comfortable. Eventually, she started humming. A happy little tune she remembered from her childhood, but she couldn't remember where it was from. Then she couldn't remember how it went. She decided to freestyle it. Then she thought she'd make up some lyrics and sing along. Oh. There once was a girl who wanted to be a pony, fiddly-I, diddly-I, She went to the doctor and gave him some Monet, fiddly-I, diddly-I, He said to the girl, I'll make you a pony, but it turns out the doctor was just such a phony. So the girl stayed a girl but she lost all her Monet, fiddly-I, diddly-I, Oh, hi there, how are you? That was a lovely song, dear. How are you feeling? The nurse was a pretty older lady with lovely red hair and a sweet smile. Oh, I'm sure that was a pretty crappy song, but thank you. And, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm a little loopy, but I'm fine. Could you check to see if my legs fell off? I can't seem to find them. That would be the sedatives, dear. We have to make sure you don't thrash around and hurt yourself. Ah, that would explain a lot. Thanks. What's your name? Jane. And your name is Erin. Yup. And I really just love your hair, Jane. It's so red. Yours is lovely too, dear. Why don't you try to get some sleep? I'll turn off this sedative drip now. The next time you wake up, you should be able to actually get out of bed if you want. Oh, that would be lovely. I feel like I've spent days just lying in this bed. I'd love to go for a walk, and Erin was asleep again. Jane left, grateful that she didn't have to tell the young pony how long she'd actually been asleep in that bed. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Let me get this straight, Erin said, scowling. Converting me to a pony took 2 weeks, like expected. But then I was stuck in this bed for another month. Dr. Fisher looked embarrassed. Well, you see. It took longer for you to finish. Well, I guess, cooking, would be an appropriate analogy. No, it wouldn't, Erin said. And your body wanted to reject the implants that Dr. Edwards provided. Big surprise, there. But we finally got it all worked out. Everything should be working just fine now. Should. Yes. You can try getting up, if you like. You'll have to unstrap me, first. Of course, of course. We just wanted to make sure you didn't hurt yourself. Keep in mind, you're pretty strong now for such a relatively small creature. Erin winced slightly as Dr. O, the chief of medicine himself, began unstrapping her. Please, don't call me a creature, Doc. I feel weird enough about this already. Dr. O, whom Erin hadn't worked with much recently, finally got the last leather restraint off of her leg. Erin levered her head up off the bed, still feeling woozy, and looked down at her body. That might have been a mistake. A small bubble of hysteria started rising in her brain, gaining both size and momentum as she looked at these limbs that were hers and not hers at the same time. Focus on the sunflower, she thought, and so she did. The sunflower on her flank had turned out beautifully. Even though it was made up of tinted hairs, it looked almost real. More like a photograph that had been grafted to her flank, rather than a tattoo. It looked almost too real. The scientists had done a very good job with it. She felt herself calming down, so she started looking at the rest of her body. Light brown coat, okay. Kind of boring, compared to the bright colors she had seen on the Ponyworld ponies, but that's fine. It looks nice, and it complements the sunflower tattoo really well. Her legs were well muscled, but sleek, and suddenly she felt herself starting to panic again, as she stared at these unfamiliar legs. She returned her attention to the sunflower until she had a chance to calm down. Okay, she decided after a few more minutes. Back to the assessment, and stop being a baby about this. She glanced down each leg, and then tried to move each one individually. She was able to get them to twitch in response, which caused another few moments of sunflower gazing until she calmed down. Are you alright, Erin? Dr. O asked her. I'm fine, she replied, taking her eyes off of her body. It's just extremely freaky, that's all. It's like my brain doesn't accept that these are my limbs and this is my body, now. That's to be expected, Dr. O said. Take your time with it, and try to keep calm. Erin nodded, grateful for the man's understanding. She looked back down at her body again. Hooves. Okay, she had hooves now. No big deal. She only had to look at the sunflower for a few seconds this time before she could go back and study the hooves in more detail. The hooves looked delicate, almost dainty. They were a slightly darker brown than her coat, so close in color that it was hard to tell where her pastern. It was difficult to tell where her pastern ended and the hoof began. Not really thinking about it, she brought her hoof up to her face. The joint bent much like her arm would have, which surprised her somewhat. She amused herself briefly by touching the bottom of her hoof to her muzzle. It tickled, and she started to giggle a little bit. Erin. Everything all right? Oh, yeah. It's just, my leg shouldn't even be able to bend this way. Plus, the hairs on my muzzle tickle a little bit. This is all just so weird. Well, remember, Dr. Fisher said, we did design your limbs to be very flexible, like the Ponyworld ponies. You should have a range of motion similar to how your arms worked before. Really? Erin started stretching her forelines around, rotating them in circles, waving them, and just generally moving them however she pleased. It was still pretty freaky quick, calming glance at the sunflower tattoo, but her fascination with her new body was starting to outweigh the sense of wrongness she felt looking at it. After a few minutes of hoof waving, she decided to try actually getting out of bed. That was a bit trickier than she had expected. Her entire center of gravity had changed, plus the bed seemed a lot farther off the floor than she would have expected. Finally, and with a little help from Dr. O, she was standing, somewhat shakily, on her own 4 hooves. She noticed with some dismay that her eyes were about on the level of the others' navels. That would take some getting used to. She had been shorter than average, as a human, but she still hadn't been abnormally short. Being this much smaller than everyone else was going to take some major adjustments. Until I go to Ponyworld, at least, she thought. She was pretty wobbly, though. She kept trying to compensate for where she thought her center of gravity would be, rather than where it actually was. She tried concentrating on just maintaining balance, but that made things worse. Finally, she closed her eyes and stopped trying to think about standing at all, just letting her body take over. That seemed to work. Much like her human body, the pony body automatically adjusted itself to stay upright, without any conscious effort on her part. Instead of thinking about standing, she instead focused on the feeling of her hooves on the ground, and the feeling of air moving over her body. She'd thought that being all fuzzy would cut down on that sensation, but instead, it seemed to heighten it, as even the most minuscule current of air brushed against thousands of hairs all over her body. All over her body. She pondered that for a moment, then suddenly a thought occurred to her. She stiffened up and immediately fell over on her side, then tried, unsuccessfully, to scramble back up on her hooves. Erin, calm down, Dr. O shouted, sounding extremely concerned by her evident panic and apparent seizure. You're all right. Calm down. You're okay. I'm not okay, she wailed. I'm naked. Both doctors burst into laughter at that, which had the calming effect of a bucket of ice water on Erin's nerves. She went from frantically embarrassed to embarrassed but pissed off in the blink of an eye. It's not funny. Get me some clothes, or something. She glared at them as they ignored her completely. Dr. O was at least attempting to straighten his face, but Dr. Fisher was leaning up against the wall, gasping for breath. It's not funny, she muttered, finally managing to get to her hooves. She stumbled her way over to the bed and tugged on one of the sheets with her mouth until it came loose, trying her best to drape it over herself. Instead, she collapsed on the floor again, and the sheet settled over her like a shroud. What's all the hullabaloo? Another voice asked. Erin peeked out from under her sheet and then groaned as Dr. Welchik came walking into the room. Great, another one, she thought. Dr. O had regained enough of his composure by this point to talk. Well, you see, the thing is, Ms. Olsen is a bit embarrassed about, well, being in the altogether naked. Oh, neat, Erin thought sourly, it turns out ponies can blush. Excuse me, gentlemen, Dr. Welchik said sternly, but this is no laughing matter. We're programmed from a very early age with a sense of propriety, women especially, and naturally she's going to be upset about this. Erin felt a surge of gratitude as Dr. Welchik lowered himself to one knee to be closer to her eye level. Erin peeked out at him from underneath her sheet. Still, though, and I'm sorry to say this, Dr. Welchik said, but you're just going to have to get used to it, my dear. Most of the ponies on Ponyworld don't seem to wear much in the way of clothing, and to fit in, you will also have to go without. Go without, and at least look like you're comfortable with it. Somehow, the thought had never occurred to Erin. She'd been worried about the procedure, been worried about being a pony, worried about whether or not they'd be able to change her back, and definitely worried that she'd be shoved through a doorway between worlds fairly soon, but the thought that she'd be walking around basically nude had never occurred to her. Can't I just at least wear clothing for now? She asked plaintively. I mean, I've been through so many changes recently, can't you just give me that? Dr. Welchik sighed, then shook his head. I am sorry, my dear, but I'm afraid that would turn out to be a rather crippling psychological crutch fairly quickly. Our team predicts that the next viable window we'd be able to use to send you over will happen in roughly 3 weeks' time. That gives us very little time to get you used to your new body, and to going without clothing. You may as well get used to it all at once. If it helps at all, Dr. O said, just remember that you're a pony now, and you are covered with fur. It's not like you're a naked human woman, you're a pony without clothes. Which, when you think of it, is actually pretty normal. Yeah, surprisingly enough, that doesn't help much at all, Erin said peevishly. Then she sighed. Fine, I'll get up and try to start walking. But anyone who so much as makes a comment or laughs is getting bucked. And you may want to consider at about what level my hooves would be if I kicked backwards. The three men all flinched simultaneously as the thought hit them, Erin smugly noticed. Then, with some effort, she struggled back up to her hooves. That much was getting easier, at least. Then, with a sigh, she stepped out from underneath the sheet, face burning with embarrassment. There we go, said Dr. Welchik, clapping his hands. Oh, how amazing. You do look wonderful, my dear. I imagine you'll want to see a mirror. I suppose so, Erin grumbled. Even those few steps she had just taken had seemed precarious and dangerous to her. Dr. O was wheeling out a large, full-length mirror on a wheeled stand. He angled it towards her, and Erin found herself staring raptly at her own reflection. A pony stared back at her. Definitely a pony, indistinguishable, as far as she could tell, from the ponies she had seen in the videos that Dr. Hansen had provided her before her change. Her eyes were still green, but a deeper green than she had before. Almost a pine green. That was surprising. Somehow, she had expected that her eyes would stay mostly the same. Light brown coat, yes, she'd seen that before, but what she hadn't noticed, because she was laying on it, was her new tail. A deep auburn in color, it complemented the brown of her hide quite beautifully, and matched the sunflower on her flank as well. Her mane, the same auburn, was a tumbled mess on her head, lush and thick and incredibly tangled at the moment. How am I supposed to brush that? She thought, worried. All in all, she looked cute, like a pony, and not at all anything like she had before. None of her features had really translated across. The face that looked back at her now was a stranger's face. Her hair had been brown before, not auburn. Her eyes were a different color. There was nothing there at all that looked like her. Somehow, she was disappointed. She thought she'd still be able to recognize her own face. Still, though, concerns about nudity were starting to feel a little silly. She was obviously not human, not anymore. Modesty just didn't seem to apply now. She stood and stared for quite some time, angling her body this way and that, swishing her tail and moving her ears around. The freakiness of the situation, though strong, was rapidly fading, and the fascination was definitely on the rise. Finally, she became aware once again of the three men in the room with her, and how she was wasting their time as she stared at herself in the mirror. Sorry about that. It's just so cool, she said. The three men all chuckled. Well, I'm glad you like it, said Dr. Welchik. Do you think we could start with a few exercises now? Start getting you used to your body. I'm thinking that we should start by teaching you to eat. Unless Dr. O still has any concerns about your health. No, she should be fine, he replied. I've had plenty of time to monitor her vitals. Everything is ticking along nicely. Besides, it will be good to get some solids into her. As he said that, Erin suddenly realized how extremely hungry she was. Her stomach grumbled loudly. Dr. Welchik laughed his booming laugh. Well, he said, that definitely seems to be a vote for, get Erin something to eat. Let's see if you can walk to the cafeteria. The cafeteria. Aren't I supposed to be secret or something? Oh, no concerns about that. You'll be staying in the scientist's compound now, and they've all been notified as to your change. You may get some stares, in fact I can pretty much guarantee that you will, but they've all been briefed. Okay, she said hesitantly, suddenly feeling stage fright. She tried walking, and stumbled almost immediately. Straightening herself out, she tried again, and this time nearly fell over. Erin, try this, said Dr. O. I've owned horses before, and they walk with the following gait, back left, back right, front right. Try labeling those legs as 1, 2, 3 and 4, then counting it off as you move. She had a bit more success with that, counting silently under her breath. After a few false starts, she was finally moving at a slow but respectable pace down the hallway. She was so focused that she didn't notice any of the nurses or other personnel stopping to stare at her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. She was frowning as she concentrated on the order of moving her legs. Very good, Erin. You're doing wonderfully, Dr. Velchik said suddenly, startling her. 3, 2, no, Dangit, she said, collapsing in a heap. She groaned and managed to pull herself up again. She reflected ruefully that at least she was getting plenty of practice falling down and standing back up. She barely stumbled at all that time. Ah, so sorry my dear. I'll keep my mouth shut this time. Please, continue. Erin nodded, and started counting again as she started walking once again. In the distance, she could smell the food from the cafeteria. Her stomach rumbled again, and she unconsciously began hurrying her steps. After another 20 feet or so, she had stopped counting, and was just moving her legs. After 30, the movement almost felt natural. Erin marveled at that, then remembered what Dr. Fisher had said about enhanced muscle memory. I hope everything is this easy to learn, she thought, walking more confidently. At least, confident until she walked into the lunchroom, when all conversation stopped and all eyes turned towards her. Erin had never felt so on the spot and exposed before in her life. She managed to say, when suddenly one of the scientists in the room stood up from his seat and started clapping. Several others joined him, and soon the entire cafeteria was applauding and whistling their appreciation to her. The blush she managed now put all her previous ones to shame with its sun-like intensity. She managed a weak smile, but more than anything wanted to bolt back to her room. Only her lack of confidence in her walking abilities kept her rooted to the spot. Dr. Velchik must have noted her discomfort, because he raised both hands and called for quiet. Thank you everyone. I'm sure Erin is quite happy at your approval, but right now she is feeling just a little overwhelmed. Not to mention hungry. If you would all be so kind as to give her some space and as much privacy as you can, considering this is an open area, I'm sure she would appreciate it. The applause and well-wishing died down. People waved at her, then returned to their meals, though she caught most of them glancing up occasionally in apparent fascination. She tried to put them out of her mind, and concentrated on walking towards an open table that Dr. Velchik indicated. That way, my dear. I'll go grab a few things that I think you may like. Please make yourself comfortable over there, if you can. Erin nodded, and slowly made her way over to the table. Her ears swiveled madly on her head as she heard people whispering around her. Talking about her. Still blushing furiously, she tried to shut them out, and simply concentrate on walking. Finally, she reached the table, and realized that she was going to have a problem. Her chin was about level with the tabletop, which meant that it would be tricky to eat, but the chairs weren't designed for ponies to sit in. She considered it for a moment, then pulled one of the chairs back slightly by hooking a hoof around a chair leg, then she tried climbing up into the seat. Dr. Rowe offered to help her, but she waved him off. She had to learn to do things for herself, after all. After a few attempts, she managed to get her rump and rear hooves up on the seat. She sat down on her haunches with her front hooves up on the tabletop. She almost felt normal and very pleased with herself, until she heard several people in her unintended and nearly forgotten audience all go, "Da," at the same time. She buried her face in her forearms and could have died of embarrassment right then and there. Fortunately, the food that Dr. Velchik was bringing back provided a nice distraction. He had a platter that had a variety of raw vegetables, including carrots and celery, broccoli, and cauliflower. He also had some apples, several pastries, some ice cream, and what appeared to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He also had a large plastic tumbler of water. Erin eyed that warily, not sure how she'd manage to drink from it. I know you could eat meat if you wanted to, my dear, but I'm afraid the thought of watching a pony eating a hamburger gives me the heebie-jeebies, so I hope you don't mind the more vegetarian options I brought for you. That's fine, she said, laughing tensely. All the stares were putting her on edge, so she concentrated on eating. The carrots were delicious, as was the celery, which was a vegetable that she really never appreciated before. She moved her way through the vegetables, picking each morsel up with her lips, and then passing them back into her mouth for chewing. The apples were a bit more complex. She didn't feel like eating the core, which meant that she'd have to hold it and take bites out of it, rather than shoving the whole thing in her mouth. She carefully took one between her forehooves and bit into it. It was delicious, and the juice ran down her chin. She didn't care, as she turned the apple carefully and took another bite. Once she got the hang of it, she rapidly finished off the first apple, then moved on to the other two, finishing them in the same fashion. The pastries took a bit more delicacy. When she tried to pick up the first one, it simply crumbled to pieces before she could get it to her mouth. With the second one, she used her right hoof to nudge the pastry onto the surface of her left hoof wall, using it like a plate. She brought her left hoof up to her mouth and took a bite. Having got the knack for it, she finished off the rest of the pastries in record time. She was still pretty hungry, though. What next? Peanut butter and jelly, or ice cream? She noted that the ice cream was melting at an alarming rate, so she decided to eat that next. Unfortunately, handling a spoon with hooves was not an easy feat, even when those hooves are on limbs which are modified to be especially nimble. In order to hold the spoon, she had to press it between her forehooves, which was difficult to maneuver. She managed to get the spoon into the ice cream, but really only managed to make a mess, flinging melting gobbets of it all over the table. Finally, frustrated, she just lowered her head to the bowl and took a big bite of ice cream. Aagh. Ice cream headache, ow, ow, ow. Rubbing at a temple with her hoof, Erin decided that she was done with the ice cream and moved on to the sandwich. After the practice with the other foods, she managed to pick up the sandwich with only minimal squishing, and ate the whole thing in a few big gulps. Finally satisfied with food, she now realized that the peanut butter had left her pretty thirsty. Erin looked at the tumbler full of water cautiously, then managed to pick it up delicately with her hooves. She put her lips to the rim, and then realized that she had no way at all to tip the glass back and pour the water into her mouth. Putting the water back down for the moment, she considered the possibilities. Could she balance it on the table and use that to tip it back? It may work, but she would probably end up spilling. Erin had another idea. Once again, she used her hooves on either side to raise the plastic glass of water. Then she clamped onto it with her teeth, then shifted her hooves around to the bottom, and then pushed up. Cool water poured into her mouth, and she gratefully swallowed. She downed the whole thing, then set the tumbler back on the tabletop, grinning in triumph. Well, my dear, I'm very impressed. You've come a long way in a very short time. Soon, we'll have you doing all sorts of pony things just like a Ponyworld native. Dr. Velchik laughed at that, and Erin smiled at him. She was pretty proud of herself, figuring out how to eat like that so quickly. She also felt a little foolish, being so proud of something she had first mastered when she was still in diapers. Did you want any more food, my dear? Actually, what I really want is a bath. I feel pretty gross right now, honestly. And then I want to try brushing my hair and mane. None of the ponies I saw on Ponyworld looked anywhere near this disheveled, so obviously they groomed themselves. I'd better figure out how to do that, don't you think? That's an excellent idea. Dr. Rowe, would you be kind enough to take Erin to her new quarters? I have to go talk to the harmonics team to see if we can verify when the next likely window will be. Absolutely. Please come with me, Erin. Erin slid off of her chair and started following him out. She became aware of more whispering behind her, so she stopped at the entrance to the cafeteria, turned back, and waved briefly with a big smile on her face. Later, everyone, she said, and most of the people there replied cheerfully back. Erin turned away, smiling, and walked behind Dr. Rowe. She had a feeling that she might like being a pony, after all. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Ah, Erin screamed in frustration, I hate being a pony. Once again, the comb had gotten stuck in her wet mane, caught up in one of the many tangles she was trying to work out. She fumbled with it, trying to get a grip on it with her forehoofs, and then tried to get hold of it with her teeth. Neither worked, as the comb simply became more and more entangled in her out-of-control mane. Fine, stay in there, stupid comb, she yelled, then sank sulkily into the bathwater until only her nostrils and the top of her head were above water. She was contemplating just asking someone to cut her mane and tail really short when there was a sudden knock at her bathroom door. Modesty, honed by years of instinct, made her shrink back in the tub before she remembered that she was a pony, and therefore not really naked. Who is it? Hi, Erin. It's Maggie. Can I come in? Erin breathed a sigh of relief. Sure, come on in. The door opened and Maggie walked in. She stopped abruptly, staring at the mostly submerged pony with her knotted up mane. Oh, my, you look simply adorable. Thanks, I guess. Erin blushed. What can I help you with? Paul asked me to stop by and run a timeline past you, to see if you were okay with it. I've also brought some more video footage that we've managed to take since you started this process. Nothing much new, just more of the same things, but we thought that we should run it by you. Oh, that's fine then. Sure, go ahead. Before I start that, though, did you want some help with that? She asked, indicating the hopelessly tangled comb. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, Erin replied, straightening up so her head was completely clear of the water. She was grateful to have someone else around who could deal with the quite probably demon-possessed comb. Maggie smiled, and started to untangle the mane around the comb as she talked. You know, I'm kind of surprised that they just gave you regular grooming objects. I wouldn't think ponies would have items like this. You don't think they'd have combs? What I meant is, Maggie said, as she started working the comb free, I'd imagine that pony grooming tools would be, of necessity, things that ponies could use easily with hooves. Maybe with some kind of strap that you can put on, so you don't have to fumble trying to hold it with both hooves while you work. Ah, got it. The comb came loose, and Maggie started running it through her mane as she kept talking. Erin closed her eyes and sighed in contentment. It felt pretty good. You know, when I was a little girl, I always wanted a pony, Maggie said. I mean, it's a common cliché, I know, but I did. We didn't have enough money, though, when I was growing up. Now I have enough money, and I don't have the time. So, I guess what I'm saying is, thanks for letting me fulfill a childhood fantasy by combing out your mane for you. Believe me, it's completely my pleasure. Erin grinned back at her, and they shared a laugh. Well, regarding when it will be time to actually head over to Ponyworld, we predict that we have roughly 20 days before we have a window between worlds that will be stable enough to push you through. There are several less stable ones before that which would probably work just as well, but we'd rather wait for the best shot that we've got. I really appreciate that, Erin said, and Maggie smiled briefly. What that means, she continued, is that we have to make sure that we've trained you and gotten you used to your new body as soon as possible. We've designed a number of tests and challenges for you, which we will be running you through starting tomorrow. Also, we're going to restrict your food as closely as possible to actual pony foods that we've seen them eat. Erin grimaced as Maggie tugged on a particularly stubborn snarl. We'll also need to do a complete rundown of your cybernetics. We've already verified that the record functions are working, we did that while you were asleep. Also, the data transfer works just fine. We still need to check to make sure that the two-way communications works, though. Also, we need to make sure that you can access the enhanced functions of your eyes and ears. Erin said, relaxing as the older woman continued to comb away. Maggie stopped talking for a while and concentrated on the grooming, and Erin was on the point of dozing when Maggie suddenly put the comb down and declared her mane well combed and snarl-free. Climb on out of that tub, she said, and I'll get your tail, too. Oh, yeah. Erin clambered out awkwardly of the tub and stood there dripping on the tile floor of her bathroom. Maggie grabbed a towel and helped to dry her off, then picked the comb up again. Erin sighed at the ease with which the older woman managed these once familiar chores. I really miss my hands, she said, and Maggie laughed again. Once Erin was relatively dry, Maggie brought out a tablet and keyed up the videos that she wanted Erin to watch, propping the tablet up on the counter so Erin could watch comfortably while she had her tail combed. Once again, she was watching the ponies of Ponyworld, only this time it seemed to be mostly younger ones. Colts and fillies were running around playing while being watched by a few smiling adults. Erin watched as most of the young ones played a game that seemed to involve one of them kicking a ball as hard as they could, then having the whole mob of them chase after it, only to have it kicked in another direction. There didn't seem to be any rules at all, just youngsters being young and having a fun time. She smiled. Ponyworld really did seem idyllic. In some ways, she couldn't wait to go there. In others, of course, she was completely scared to death. Tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Training was hard, at first, mostly due to Erin's impatience. There were many activities, like running, or picking things up, or writing, that she was used to taking for granted, having been able to do all these things most of her life. Being a pony, and not having hands, meant that she had to learn most of that all over again from scratch. Trotting, cantering and galloping took a few days for her to pick up. Once she got it, though, it seemed second nature. That is, until they put her on an indoor obstacle course, and then she started overthinking everything once again. For a few more days, she ended up either flat on her face or crumpled in a heap on the floor at the slightest provocation. Manipulating things with her mouth and hooves took a lot longer. As the days went by, though, she rapidly started to learn how to use her hooves in ways she'd never thought of. For example, when it came to drinking, she was now able to balance the glass neatly with one hoof while tipping it back with the other. Even combing and brushing her mane and tail got to be much easier as time went by, in spite of the fact that the combs and brushes were still the ones made for humans. She brushed her teeth by a simple method of pinning the toothbrush between her hooves. It still seemed odd to her that she was able to press the bottoms of her hooves together, but there was no doubt that it was definitely very useful that she could do so. Writing was what got to her the most. She tried using her hooves at first, but that was far too clumsy. Instead, she ended up taking the pen in her mouth, clamping down with her teeth, and then moving it with her lips. It took days before her letters even started to look recognizable, and weeks before she could write legibly, though crudely. All the while, they kept showing her new footage from Ponyworld as they collected it. They even managed to open a window in the middle of one of the towns, showing that ponies had shops and stalls, and apparently even money, as they exchanged small golden coins for various goods. Dr. Velcheek got a team going on minting up some gold coins of roughly the same shape and size of the ones they saw exchanged. Erin was glad about that, but also a little nervous. Didn't that count as counterfeiting? She didn't want to find out if ponies had a jail. She resolved that she would use the Earth-made coinage only as a last resort. Maybe she could find a job, or something. The days ticked down. Erin first became competent at the obstacle course, and with her day-to-day activities, and then she began to excel. She was still a little clumsy sometimes, but she was steadily improving. ****. It was on a Thursday, 21 days after she woke up as a pony, that the window was scheduled to be opened. Erin stood on the platform in the clean room, heart thundering, as she fidgeted on her hooves. She was wearing saddlebags filled with various objects, combs and brushes for her mane and tail, her toothbrush, a couple of blankets made of thickly quilted cotton, some raw fruits and vegetables, and a bag full of little golden coins with a string that she could use to hang it around her neck, if she chose. She had been waiting in this tiny room for hours, waiting as her nerves slowly wound up, because they weren't sure exactly when the window could be opened other than soon. She'd been put through a purifying process to cleanse her as much as possible of any bacteria, viruses or fungi that she might have had living on her body. She'd insisted on that much, not wanting to carry some horrific disease or invasive species into Ponyworld. Still, even though she knew she couldn't, she yearned to leave the clean room and go for a quick run. Or get something to eat, or read, or do anything at all to take her mind off of the fact that, at any second, a very rare two-way window would open up, and she would step through to another world. She should have brought a book, she should have brought something in to distract her, she should have. This is it, Erin. Dr. Velcheek's voice suddenly boomed over the intercom, making her squeak in sudden terror as she jumped straight up off the ground. The window is about to open. She wondered if it was too late to ask to use the bathroom. The emitters began to hum as they warmed up, rapidly rising in volume until Erin's teeth started to vibrate. Suddenly, there was an incredibly bright flash, and Erin screwed her eyes shut. She opened them again as a gust of warm air brushed across her cheek. Green, inviting and peaceful, Ponyworld stood directly in front of her. A few steps, and she'd be in. Even at this late stage she was terrified of taking those steps. A whole different world. The prospect was exciting, but also terrifying. She gulped nervously. For a moment, she wavered, her nerves frayed, and she considered backing out. For a horrible moment, the only thing that kept her from doing so was the shame she'd feel facing all those scientists and technicians, knowing she'd failed, knowing she'd let humanity down. And suddenly, she remembered the sunflowers. She wasn't just an explorer. She was someone who was looking for hope, not just for her own species, but for the playful, innocent ponies that she'd grown to love watching over the last few weeks. They needed her too, even though they didn't know it yet. It was up to her, really, to determine if humanity was going to come to this new world in partnership as friends, or as ravagers, like a swarm of locusts. Determination welling up within her, she took the first steps into a whole new world. Author's notes. Some fan art for this chapter. No Kara. Light falls. Auto pencil.